In this video, I'll be reviewing functions, and we'll be talking about how to use functions to make some dynamic changes to the scenes that we've been working on. Throughout this semester, we're going to be looking at new ways to make our code more organized and more sophisticated ways of reusing code. Today, we're going to review functions as one step in that process. This week, we'll also be talking about how to add some simple collision detection inside those functions. So we'll be starting with a very simple physics topic as well. So let's get into reviewing functions. I'm going to get things set up a bit. So I'm just going to go to GitHub desktop. So I'm going to go to my MMP 310 repository and make sure I'm on my MMP 310 repository. I'm going to duplicate my last project so we can add some changes to it, but leave the last project in place. So I'm going to duplicate project 1-3. So I'm hitting Command D on the Mac. You can do Command Control Copy, Control Paste, Control C, Control V on the PC. I'm going to delete the thumbnail that's in here and the other one as well. And so then we're ready to go. So I'm going to go back here. You can see those new files are there. I'm going to go to click Open in Sublime Text, and we're going to go to project 1-4. And so let's make sure our Sublime server is running. Okay. And open up a new window. And let's make this a bit bigger and go to localhost 8080. Okay, and we can go to MMP 310. I haven't created this link yet, so I'm just going to type it in back here, project 1-4. Okay, there we go. I'm going to open up the console just to get started. And so we're going to make a few changes here. I'm going to make the scene a little bit bigger because we're going to be adding some new content this week, and we might want a little bit more room for it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up sketch.js. And so I'm going to leave most of this stuff the same. I'm going to change this to project 1-4. Let's say adding functions and collisions. And we're kind of looking at how these things work. We'll be restructuring a lot of this code in some of our future lessons. So I'm going to leave most of this stuff the same, collapse some of this stuff. And one thing I am going to change is in the setup function. So I'm going to make the scene take up a bit more space so we have more space to work with. So I'm going to change the canvas. I'm going to use the window width here. Okay, so that you might remember this P5 variable. It just basically tells us what's the width of the entire window. And so if I change that to window width, then we get a lot more space that way. And if I go down here, and if I go over here and say window height, then our canvas is going to take up the full window. You might notice that there's some new scroll bars that we didn't have before. Those are not very appealing. We can get rid of those pretty easily, but we're going to do that in style.css. So we haven't used style.css in a while. I'm just going to open it up, and we're going to change the body. So these margins, if we click on the body, you can see those orange margins. We want to get rid of those. So I'm just going to say margin is 0. And we still might see a little bit of scrolling here because there might be like a little bit of pixel difference between the canvas and the body. So to get rid of that, I can just say overflow. So the overflow property in CSS is just like any content that goes outside of the window of that element. And I'm just going to say hidden. So that prevents the user from scrolling there. So now we have a nice little window where we can move our character around and nothing else really changes. So we can we can leave our clouds here the way they are. You might want to add a few more. I'm going to close the style.css. So you might want to add some more trees, some more clouds. Let me do that real quick. So let's move our foreground trees down. I'm going to use height here. I'm going to say height -200. So these will be down at the bottom. Oh, we didn't even need to do 200. Let's do 50. Okay, 100. Okay, so that'll kind of mark the bottom of our scene. Then our clouds up here, or our trees up here. So we'll be using better structures for this in the future. But for now, let's just put a cloud like. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the setting. You guys can feel free to move stuff around or leave it the way it was. But what I want to do in here is give myself a little bit more space, and also, show you guys how you would create the full screen look if you wanted to go with that. And what I'm going to add in here now are some functions that have some narrative components to our story. So we'll add those in this video, and in the next video we'll use collisions to reveal them. So in a lot of games you might see like some like signs or some scrolls or something like that that kind of lead your character through the game. And so we're going to add a few of those, and this is an easy way to kind of bring in some topics. So instead of jumping right into like platforms or physics or like other things, we're just going to kind of introduce new topics, and then we'll build on that. So let's review what a function is, and then we'll add a new function to our scene. So what's going to be different about these objects is that they're going to have different text in them, because we're going to be sort of telling a story. So the trees are all kind of the same thing. The clouds are all kind of the same thing. It's easy to use an array for those. But for something that we want to repeat that has a bunch of changes to it, it's easier to use a function, because we can use specific arguments that we put inside of the function, and then we can repeat the same structure a few different times. So I'm just going to create like a little sign and then I'll write some text on it. So I'm going to go to my Piskel editor and just create a sign real quick. So I'm going to sign in. And click create sprite. And so we're in the woods, so I'll use like some brown kind of color for the sign. And then I'll actually have black for the outside of the sign. So let's draw. So that's kind of the stake for the sign. Then I'm just going to draw kind of the outside. And then we'll fill it in brown. And so that's kind of just like a generic sign that we'll use. I'll kind of fill it in with different stuff later. Maybe I'll draw, some kind of lines on it to make it look like it's made out of wood. Maybe I'll make this a bit bigger and put like a little pedestal here. Okay, good enough for now. So I'm gonna go to export, or actually I'll save this first. So I'll just say sign, save that. And I'll crop it. And I'm gonna go to export. I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger. And it's just gonna be a PNG because it's just one frame. And so let's take a look at that. So I'm gonna open up my downloads folder. And feel free to use whatever you want for this. It doesn't really have to be specifically a sign. There's a lot of different things that you might wanna add to the game. You could add scrolls or like rocks or whatever you think works in this case. Let's add in our sign image. So we're going to say sign image, and then in function preload, just say sign image equals load image sign.png. So we'll have that ready. We're going to draw this sign not in the draw function, but in its own function, because we're going to have different signs with different text. And that's kind of what a function is useful for. So a function is something that we use in our program that can be used for a lot of different things. And it's basically just like a recipe or a series of things that you want your code to do. I like to think of a function as being kind of like a blender. So as a simple metaphor, if we have like a blender here, with like, our little blender controls, and the blender is whatever the function does. So it's going to take some ingredients and it's going to turn it into a smoothie. So whatever that requires. So what goes into the blender, could be different things. So if you put like some apples and some bananas and some oranges into the blender, you're going to end up with like a fruit drink. If you put some like lettuce and some grapes and some, what else would you put? Spinach kind of already looks like this. Whatever else, if you put that into the blender, that's going to give you like a vegetable and grape juice. So whatever you put into the blender, it always does the same thing. but if you get a different result because of what you put into it. So that's like the arguments for a function. So like in our P5 functions, like image, the arguments are like the image of the tree and then the position of the tree. Since the positions change, like our ingredients change, the result of this image function, it's always the same tree, but it's in different positions. With our function, we're going to add a little bit more functionality to it. It's going to have different text for the sort of signs or narrative of our scenes so far. And so we need to make our own function to be able to do that. So I'm going to make a function here and call this sign. And the sign function is going to take an x and y value and then a message, and we'll display that message. So we have an x and a y and then a message. I'm going to just put MSG, so message, an abbreviation for message. So first we're going to draw that sign. So I'm going to have an image function, and it's going to be the sign image at x and y. And then we're going to draw our message. So we're going to use the text function to draw the message, and we'll draw that at x and y as well. This isn't going to look right to begin with, but I'm just putting it there, and then we'll fix the design in a minute. So let's go to our draw function. That's sort of like the main function we're using to determine what we draw. And let's put in a sign. I'm going to collapse this, and I'm going to put the sign before we draw the character, but it's dependent on the position of the character. We'll see why in the next video. So I'm going to draw the sign in between the character movement, the character itself. So I'm going to say signs go here. So that way the character will be on top of the sign, but the sign will come after the character moves, which is going to be important for later. So let's start with one sign, and I have to remember the XY, the order. So it goes X, Y, and then message. You can put these in whatever order you want, but usually you start with the X, Y, and then the message. Although with the P5 image, it starts with the image and then the X, Y. So maybe we should do that. And that's actually what this looks like as well. So let's just keep that the same. So we'll do message and then X, Y. And the message really is more important in terms of what the sign is being used for. The positions are just kind of there, so we know where to put it. So let's start with the first sign. It just says start here. And put a little exclamation point since it's a video game. And we'll put that kind of at the left side of the screen, so 100 on the X, and let's do height over 2 on the Y, so it'll be in the middle of the canvas. And so if we reload our scene, we should see that. Okay, so there's our sign. It's actually quite large. That's not as big as I thought it would be, but that's okay. We can make it smaller if we really want to. And you can see our text. So let's put a little bit of work into designing the text, and then we should be good to go. We can make some more signs. So I want to make the text a little bit more visible. So I'm going to actually make the fill white. Okay, so that stands out a lot more. I could like change the font. Like if I wanted to use something silly like Comic Sans MS, that might fit a little bit better. And we can even make the font size a bit bigger. So I'll say text size, let's say 20, maybe 18. We want it to be readable, but not too large. And so then we want to match the text to the image. Our images are being drawn in the center. So we can do text align is center. Okay, so now it's centered. And let's do the bottom. I think that's what it is. Wait, let me look that up. So I'll go to typography, text align. So top, center, baseline, bottom. So it doesn't look like it makes that big of a difference. So we're probably going to want to start our text up a little bit. But actually, I think I probably want to center this so I don't have to worry about like where the text goes. And then I can also set the text box to be about as big as the image. The image does have like a little thing down here, so I'll have to subtract that. So let's make the text box like, actually let's draw a rectangle so we can measure this first. So we'll say rectangle is at XY, and then sign image.width, sign image.height. Okay, and we need to turn on rect mode center. so it'll match. Okay, so then what we need to do is just subtract from the height until we get about the right size. Okay, so it's more like 80, 60. That's close enough. So let's go with this as our size for our text. Okay, so that'll restrict the text to fit in there. And we might not be able to write a ton. Uh-oh. We might have to include the width and height here. What if I say x minus sign image over 2? Oh, sign image dot width over 2. Okay, so we do have to kind of offset the x and y. So I'm going to say y minus sign image dot height over 2. It's a lot more complicated than I hoped, but we will come up with better ways to do this in the future. So that's kind of a long one, but it does ultimately get us to where we want, where we have the message, we have our x position, our y position, our width, and our height. We can always play with that later if we want to change things, but we just have like a simple message. It just says start here, and then we can add new messages and just change the text. And because we're using a function, we'll get another message, but it'll be in a different place and it'll have some different text. So we can start to kind of craft our narrative. So we'll say start here. And then in our next message, we can just move it over a bit. Okay, so now we have a message over here. And so we can start to kind of like frame what's happening in the scene. So we can start to imagine like what is our character going to be doing as we play this game. And so you might want to start thinking about that for your project or your game. What is it that you want to be happening? I'll just say as you know, as a placeholder for now, I'll say that my character is searching for like I don't know, a magic wand. Okay, so I'll just say begin the search for the magic wand. Okay, and we can see the width is actually a bit too big here. So let's restrict it just a bit. So for the width, maybe we'll say like minus 50. Oh, and then we start to, okay, let's say minus 40. So then whatever we offset there, we do have to add back to the x position. Okay. So yeah, that's a little annoying to set up the text correctly. That starts to look pretty crazy, but that's what we'll do for now. And then let's add one more sign here. And this one is going to say the magic wand is to the west. Okay, so I don't really know what that means. We'll kind of come up with this as we go. And so let's put this one a little bit farther over, like 800, and let's move it down a bit. So we'll say height over 2 plus 100. Okay, and let's put it at like 1000. Okay, in the next video, what we're going to do is we're actually going to kind of reveal these clues as the character approaches them. So for now, that's basically all we really need to do. When you're working on your project, you don't have to use a sign, you don't have to use text. Like you can reveal anything in these areas as the character moves into them. So that's something I'll discuss more in the second video. But this is basically what I wanted to cover in terms of creating your own function. So you can see now a lot of this code, you could have like this code repeated 3 times or whatever, but that would be kind of annoying. The nice thing about a function is I can add as many of these signs as I want, and because they're reproducible, like each sign has the same image and the same style of text, and I'm just like recreating them, that's a good sign that I want to use a function. So, whatever you end up using a function for, you can be creative about it. It could be adding different characters that say different things when you approach them, so they have some like dialogue or something else. It doesn't have to be a sign. I'm just using this as kind of a generic video game trope where there's signs when you first appear, but you have to like walk up to them to reveal what they say. So in the second video, we'll be covering using collisions to detect when the user approaches the sign. So I'm gonna close out of this one and then we'll complete this in the next video. So that's our review of functions. We'll probably be using different structures as we go throughout the semester, but it's good to kind of review functions at this point. So I'm gonna close this out. And even though I'm not done with this, I'm just gonna commit my changes. So I actually made a couple different changes. I updated my main style sheet. So I wanna represent that. So I'm gonna say adds new sign function and updates style.css. So I'm gonna commit that to the master and push to origin. And so that's it for this video, just reviewing functions real quick. In the next video, we're gonna be adding collisions. So it's gonna get a little more complicated, but we're gonna take things step by step.